Computer. Now you're good
All
to go.
right. Good afternoon, everyone. Today is very interesting and very exciting news for me to have Julien here. Julien and I met not long ago. True, like it was really crazy how this happened because I met someone. And this someone told me, okay, I think the idea that you have this group is amazing. I'd like to join you guys. And then 2 weeks later, she told me, I'm so busy. I cannot help you in December because I was making the schedule for December. And then she told me, but you know what? I'm going to put a post on DC, Facebook, expats of international, something like that. I was just like, okay, I got one reaction, and that was Julian's. And that's how we met, not even 2 months ago. And ever since, we've been in touch every single day, and he's been helping me out with the school and with the students, and it's been just a blast. Julian, thank you so much for everything you're doing and for being here. Would you please introduce yourself a little bit to us so that we can start with a round of questions? Thank you.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Julian. I was born in Dallas, Texas. And then I ended up from French parents, so they were both born in France, and then came to Texas. Then I lived in Brazil for a while, in Itajubá, in Minas Gerais, and then Campinas. And then after that, I ended up going to France, lived there for a while. Um, and then I went back to the US. So basically, you can separate my life in the stages of schooling. Primary was the US, middle school was Brazil, high school was France, and college was the US again. Um, yeah, and so I got very into tennis back when I was in France because they play a lot of that there. So I like to keep up tennis. I'm an engineer, so I like technical stuff and that kind of thing. And I love space, so everything space related, nebulae, stars, and all of that stuff are things I like. And I occasionally write, very occasionally. Um, so yeah, uh,
I think you're very interesting, Julian, and you have lots of things to tell us. But like, I'm going to start with the first question. Can you tell us, like, was something that your parents chose for you to have this kind of life? Okay, primary school we're going to do in the US, and then we go to Brazil. Okay, he's in the age that we're going to just let's move again. Let's move around and let's help. It was something that they planned, or it just happened with the job.
no, I don't think kind of stuff is ever planned, if I'm honest with you. No, it was just due to my parents' jobs that we ended up moving a lot. So no, it wasn't planned. In fact, it was the way it happened was actually kind of funny because it was very much just we're in the US. They're like, oh, okay, kids, we're gonna go to Brazil now. Um, which as a child you don't really understand what that means. At the time I was 8. So you don't really understand what it means when your family says, we're going to go to an entirely new country that you've barely ever heard of because geography in the US is not great. Um, and so it was very interesting and it was, no, but it wasn't planned. None of our moves have ever been planned. Um, our argument with my sister and I would tell our parents, it's funny, we've never ever moved at the end of a year. We always have to move in the middle of the year,
Oh, that as well.
which is very annoying. But in the end, it gave us some experiences that we wouldn't have had otherwise. And I've gotten to see, a lot of the world already. Well, some of it. I'd like to see more. Um, so yeah, no, definitely not planned.
All right. Thanks for your answer. Mariana, are you ready for the question?
Yes, hi, nice to meet you. I'm Mariana, and I would like to ask you, how do you manage everything? You said you're in engineering, that you like to play tennis, and you have a lot of hobbies. How do you manage all of that?
Hi, Mariana. It's nice to meet you. Long story short,
You think?
um, in college it was complicated, just because when you've got your studies, and I was part of an organization at my college where we would build things. I ran a workshop, so I had a lot of fun building in that workshop. So managing, I'm gonna say with difficulty and some planning. Um, and also just, sometimes trying to make time for things, trying to just say, okay, today I'm going to do that, and I'll worry about everything else tomorrow. Um, yeah, so that and my favorite app of all time, of course, Google Calendar has gotten me through so many issues. I love Google Calendar. Um, so hopefully that answers your question.
I think it did.
Thank you.
Especially for the younger ones. Like I don't use Google Calendar, but I think every single young person nowadays they do. And like you, they are very dependent on it. And it's really funny because I'm gonna ask Hayder. Hayder, do you use Google Calendar? Or Carlos? Do you guys use Google Calendar at all?
Yeah, yeah, I do.
Yeah,
Oh,
because
okay.
Google Calendar, you can actually, if you set it to public, you can actually see your friend's calendar as well when you want to organize something. If you search up someone's email, you can see what their calendar is if they've set the events to public. Um,
Oh.
so it makes scheduling much simpler.
Oh,
Um,
I got so much to learn. But anyhow, it's not about me today, it's about you, Julien. Eric, you have a question for him.
Yeah. So as you said, you changed countries several times. Were you younger when that happened? Like how young were you when you changed all these countries?
well, the move from the US to Brazil, I was 9. The move from, you're gonna have to make me think. Okay, the move from Brazil to France, I was 14. And then obviously the move from France to the US, I was 18.
Right. So what are the consequences of all of this traveling? Un, I would say unintentionally because you went because of your parents, right? So what was the consequences, do you think? Like on yourself, I guess. Because I changed countries and I definitely know some consequences on myself and my sister as well, because we both changed countries twice.
Yeah, people sometimes, a lot of people talk about how, oh, you're so lucky you got to see all these parts of the world, and yes, that is true, but it's also extremely difficult. When we moved to Brazil, my sister and I spoke zero well, we spoke 2 words of Portuguese, which was, banheiro, obrigado, which will get you through like the emergencies, but it's not helpful to communicate. And when we were in Minas Gerais, in Itajubá, there was no one there that actually spoke either French, English, or Portuguese at the same time, which meant that we were in a school that only spoke Portuguese. And so, the first day of school was extremely difficult because, I mean, the Brazilians are super nice, but when you can't communicate, you're just there very isolated.
Right.
Um,
Especially the ones from Minas Gerais. They're especially nicer than the other.
they're awesome,
Yeah, they're
but we
super
couldn't
open.
talk. They didn't speak English or French. We didn't speak Portuguese. So there was just no communication at all, whatsoever. Basically, we would just follow them to the classroom. And their strategy was, again, there was no one to teach us. So they just put us in the classroom with a laptop with Google Translate on it, and kind of left us there for 6 months. Because, I mean, what else were we going to do? We had to go to school. Um, so I learned Portuguese on Google Translate and by listening to my colleagues speak. I don't recommend because you pick up some weird accents along the way. But, in the end, I think I was in the normal class after 6 months to a year, is what it took to get more or less fluent. And then, yeah, so that's one consequence. You feel very, very isolated. The second one is a lot of people, they have friends that they're like, oh, we've lived across from each other for, 10 years. I don't have that. All of my friends and we've all moved. None of my friends from the US when I was a kid are still there. So I'd have very little ties to Dallas anymore. None of my friends that I was with in high school in France are still there. Both of my friends in Brazil that I still stay in contact with, we've been talking for 10 years now. Neither of them are in Campinas anymore. So it's a weird existence because it's hard to maintain friendships just because everyone moves around so much. And because your life changes radically, it's hard to stay in touch and stay on the same sort of, you know, level of friendship.
Right. Also, you get used
Because,
to it. You get used to breaking ties with people, so that kind of, at
yeah,
least
I mean, it's
for
not
me.
fun, but you do get used to it.
Right.
So yeah, it is isolating. Um,
Yeah, I would say yeah. It's basically my experience. I would probably use the word alienated would be a better word in my opinion. But yeah, that's basically my experience. All right, so that was that.
All right, thank you. Aura.
Unmuted. Eyeball. Okay, sorry. Um, uh, hello. Uh, this is a question from a very long time ago, but it's okay. You said that the geography in the USA, like where you are, is bad. Why do you think that is?
Well, I don't think it's just a problem in the US. I think, have you ever been, do you remember a time when a school gave you a map of the world and told you to identify the countries? Because I can't. That's what I'm basing it on. I was never really taught where countries actually are. I've only built that up by, my own curiosity, looking it up and needing to know. Um, in Europe, it's a bit better, I would argue, because Europe, everything is so close. It doesn't make sense not to know which countries border you. But you'd be surprised at the amount of Americans who don't know that the US has a border with Canada to the north and Mexico to the south. Um, Geography is just, it's the problem is, in my opinion, we focus so much on teaching other aspects of geography that we forget the most basic one, which is where things are. I remember my geography classes, we'd learn about, soil erosion, we'd learn about, marine systems and other ecosystems, but we didn't learn about where countries are located, which I think is a bit of an oversight. So I think it's a bit of a shame not to know where these countries are. Um, and I think it's a bit sad because the world is a huge place and it's nice to know, oh, when you mention, Brazil, I know where that is. And I know more or less which countries border it. Or I know where China is and I know which countries border that. And it just helps you understand the world a bit better.
All right, let's go back to Mariana. She's on fire tonight. All right.
There I am. Yes. I've been a little distant for a while, had some problems, but I have to I have two questions, and I also have an answer to your question about when was the last time you saw a school give you a map of the world to point to the countries? Mine does. My school is very good on that. From seventh to ninth grade, they make us. Well, kind of. They have us like learn all the countries and all the capitals in the world.
That's awesome. I've heard some schools do
Yes.
that.
So like every year you have uh, at least two exams on that, which is very nice,
Wow,
actually.
Hands up for Portugal,
that's
people.
awesome.
That's cool.
And now my two questions are about your friendships and relationships. You said you moved a lot, so it is to expect that you don't really maintain a lot of your friendships and relationships. So I would like to know how you handle losing or trying to keep them, and how do you handle loneliness?
So the first question is with the two friends that I've been talking to for 10 years, we've kept in contact by basically talking almost always consistently, maybe not every day. Sometimes we might go a month without talking, but the point is we always come back. And by using things like games to keep us, talking about something. I think for me, what has been the most important thing for me maintaining friendships has been having a commonality that you can always go back to. And so for us, that ended up being games or things that we could do together. And that really helped us, maintain this friendship over the last 10 years, despite the fact that I was usually a country and six time zones away. Um, as for loneliness, yeah, it can get a bit lonely sometimes. The problem is, so I would spend on average about 4 years in a location. And the thing with 4 years is that sounds like a very long time. But there's about 1 year where you have no idea what's going on because you've just moved to the country and you're getting situated. I was also in a lot of international schools. Now, to give you an idea of what that meant, if you're not like familiar with that, the class that I joined in France, 50% of the students were different after 4 years. So half the class that I knew was gone and replaced by other people. And that is on the low end. Our class went from 120 students to 80. And of those 80, I knew maybe that 20 or 30 I'd been with for the last 4 years. So it's not only about you moving around, it's that when you move around like this, you tend to be around people who also move around. So it can get lonely not only because you're leaving, but they're leaving too. Um, so it's a bit of a weird situation. And then, nowadays we do have a lot of ways to stay in contact with people, but nothing really replaces being in the same place. Um, no amount of Zoom really replaces being in that same place unless that relationship has a very strong foundation. At least for me. Again, this is all personal. So hopefully that answers your question.
It does. Thank you.
All right. Hi there.
Hello, guys. Good afternoon. Or good. So, hi, Julien. So, guys, I like so much to talk young people because you young guys, for me, you are kind of inspiration because you young guys have a dream, have courage, have a plan. My question is, Julian, how do you see yourself in 5 years?
Uh,
Job interview.
Yeah,
Talk about
it is a
business,
job
eh?
interview.
encourage me.
Actually, I never got that question in job interviews, interestingly enough. Um,
In, in
well,
general,
I can
personal
tell you,
life, work life, sorry.
mm, so I can tell you what my ultimate goal is. What the thing I would really like to work with in the far future is manned space flight. I think that's one of the most interesting things going on right now is how can we put people back in space safely and with good reason? For me are the two big ones. So obviously I will not be doing that in 5 years, but the idea in 5 years is to go back to school and get my master's. I've got my engineering degree, but I want to, uh, work for a little bit and then go back and do a master's is my plan. Because you can't really you can't really get into human space flight without it. Without that, or at least, it's a master's or PhD is what you need. So I want to go back to doing that. That's my plan in 5 years is to be doing an engineering master's.
Okay, congratulations. Thank you.
We'll see how it goes.
Okay, Ludmila.
All right, Julian, I want to ask you about possible cultural differences through all these countries that you've been, things that you liked, you disliked, culture shock.
Oh wow, okay. Whoa. All right, let's see. I think an interesting answer to this that I learned about and I think is very cool is reverse culture shock. So when I came back to the US, it was extremely weird because remember, I left the US at 8 and didn't really come back until 18. So I spent a decade outside the US. And it's very weird because when you come back to the US, you get culture shock because you're not used to it anymore. Um, I also got, and things in the US that are surprising is the US is a place that is very, all right, so for context, because of the way that I was brought up, I haven't been able to really get into groups of people that are related to, like for example, at my university there was the Californians, the group of people who all came from California that would all hang out together. There was the, there was a Brazilian group actually. They were a bit more open though. So I won't count them in that. There was, the group of people who came from Mexico. There was the group of people who came from Washington State. Um, I've never been able to do that because in the places I live, no one came from the same place. My group of friends in France was two Russians, an English guy who was my friend as well, a Serbian, Japanese. None of us came from the same place. We gravitated together because of interests. And it was a bit of a shock for me coming back to the US because in the US people it felt like they formed groups based on common experiences, less common interests. As in common experiences brought them together and then common interests came up from there. And that's something I was no longer used to, if I'd ever been used to it. So it was very weird to come back to that. The US is also a place that is it's hard to talk about the US because you have to keep in mind that it's kind of like talking about all of Europe at the same time. Yes, there is a common culture, but this country has 350 million people in it, spread from one ocean to the other. So you can't talk about the US as one people because they kind of aren't. They are a group of people who are defined by, the states that they're in, and they're all very different. I'm in the Northeast. The Northeast is weird because there's often this idea of the Americans are all very, customer service is great and everything. The Northeast are not always very nice. Um, it's this weird sort of I can't figure out when I'm supposed to be nice and when I'm not supposed to be nice in the Northeast. So that was a bit of a shock too. France was a shock. So I'd never lived in France before I went. All I knew from France was that my parents were from there. So all I knew were stories. I had gone there to visit my grandparents, but tourism and living are two very different things. France is a very special place to live in. I mean, keep in mind that France is one of the most the people of France are some of the most politically active, I think, in the world. When a law gets passed in France that people don't like, the entire country stops. And I mean the country stops. When they tried to pass a green tax law on truckers, the truckers proceeded to immediately block all of the fuel refineries in the country. Sorry, three of the four fuel refineries in the country, which meant we couldn't go to school anymore because we had to save fuel to go get groceries. Um, when the volcano in Iceland exploded a while back, and obviously trains were going to be the huge thing to get around because no planes were flying, the French decided this was the perfect time to put the trains on strike. It is a country that, in my opinion, is almost impossible to govern. I am amazed they managed to do anything there. So that was a bit of a culture shock, is because when you buy a train ticket in France or a plane ticket, I'm not asking myself, am I going to be late? Am I going to forget my ticket or something? No, I'm asking myself, will they be on strike? Because that is more likely. That being said, that is a negative, but it is also a massive positive. It is a country that will not, at least in my experience, does not let itself be, controlled. In my opinion, you would never be able to put a fascist in France because the entire country would stop. They would be out in the streets. I mean, you try to touch Social Security in France, and the country erupts in flames. Paris starts to burn. All of the cars in the streets are destroyed. So it's a double-edged sword. That was a weird one for me. And then Brazil, obviously, I mean, I'd never been abroad at that point, lived abroad at that point. So Brazil was obviously a bit of a culture shock, especially like learning a whole new language. But for me, the biggest thing was the place itself. Brazil as an environment, the nature that you find in Brazil, especially in Minas Gerais, is like nothing you find in the US. When you are the green that you find in Brazil is greener than anything I've seen in this country. It just is. And it's kind of hard to go to Europe after that and ask yourself, well, where's all the green? Where's all this nature that's all around you? And then the cities are so different. It yeah, it's I mean I could go on for ages, but I want to hear Eric's question. But that's
Just
some of
before
the
we move to Eric, Carlos had a question which is very
ah,
similar to Ludmila's, but I think you didn't work either in Brazil or in France. Your only work experience is in the USA.
correct.
All right. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And also, what was it again with the question? Pros and cons from, yeah, living. Yeah, you already told us that. So just tell us a little bit about your ex work experience.
Um, Working in the US is interesting because the taxes are extremely complicated and no one explains it to you. So you have this weird situation of, I need to file my taxes, but I have no idea what's going on. There is a reason the US has an entire industry dedicated to people doing your taxes for you, because there's a great joke about it. But basically, the government knows how much you owe them, and it's a guessing game where you need to try and guess correctly how much they think you owe them.
Oh,
Is a great example of how it works here. And so it's a bit terrifying because you're sitting there, well, what if I guess wrong? Is the IRS going to come after me? And no, they're not. But it's weird. I don't understand why they have to do this. So working here is a bit of a situation where you have to be very careful and cautious when you're doing taxes. Um, but in the end, it's also a place where the taxes are comparatively extremely low compared to countries in other places, compared to other, locations. So it's weird. You don't get much social security. Obviously, that's not great, but your taxes are very low. Um, it's it's a very weird place. And of course, you have to be careful because everything changes based on the state that you're in. So the Northeast, where I am right now, tends to be more like Europe. You go anywhere to the south, and it's not like Europe at all. Um, so, and in terms of workplaces, I don't think there's much of a difference as to like the hiring process or how you work compared to other locations. Um, but it's also something I'm still navigating. I'm gonna start my first job soon, so it's a bit of a weird sort. Well, my first full-time job. I've held a
mhm.
bunch of others before then, but it's weird. All the jobs I've worked at, I've known my boss extremely well, and we've gotten along extremely well. So it's it's an it's an interesting place. I don't think there's no comparison really.
All
Yeah.
right, all right. But how it is to get a job? Is it easy? Or it
It
really
depends
depends
on your
on
industry. Like everywhere
really
else, it
depends
depends
on
on
the
what you want to get a
industry.
job in. In my industry, it's very weird. I mean, it's not necessarily extremely difficult, but it's not easy either. Um, uh, Tech right now is complicated because a lot of people are getting laid off.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm not in tech, but engineering is a bit better. It's complicated. It really depends on the industry. Right now, the industries that are doing really well, engineering is doing pretty well right now. So that's good. I'm happy about that. Uh, Others are not.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I guess. All right, Eric, back with a question.
Yeah. By the way, after the stream here, I have to ask your Steam account. You probably have one. And also, the question would be, a lot of people go to America for one thing or the other. Why do Americans leave the country? What makes an American decide to go out of the country? To leave to go to Canada or Mexico or a third world country or Europe?
Mm. Well, that's a really complicated question for me to answer because I'm not what you would call your traditional American.
Right.
I think at the moment there's a lot of frustration in the United States with the feeling that the political system is not aligned. And this is on both sides, by the way. This is not partisan, but there's general anger that it feels like the government of the US is no longer working for the people of the US. So there's this general anger. One of the most common reasons someone leaves the US is medical bills, unfortunately. It is occasionally, actually, it is often cheaper due to insurance to book a flight, go to Europe, get treated in Europe, and book a flight back than it is to get treated in the US. That is how
Canada? It's
unf
actually Europe as well? I thought it was just Canada.
some people will take a flight to Spain, stay 3 months in Spain, come back, and it's less expensive than being treated in the US. Um, That is how bad, unfortunately, healthcare has gotten in the United States. If you have good insurance, you're going to be okay. But if you don't, you're in a situation like that. So a lot of people leave because of medical bills, because it is simply impossible for them to sustain their life here with that. That's one of the big reasons I hear. Another reason is just mentalities are changing in the US both ways. There's a lot more people that are getting more progressive, there's people getting less progressive. And so people leave to find countries that they feel will more effectively embody their ideals. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's 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 a country that is at the moment at a very tumultuous point. It's a country that is, dealing with a lot of ingrained issues that are coming out, and people are very angry. And it's normal. I mean, this country's only it's not even 300 years old. Um, so you have to kind of keep that in mind when we talk about the US. Countries like France have undergone 4 revolutions. The US had one civil war. Um, you know, Europeans went to war hundreds of times with each other. So a lot of issues there have sort of been, not dealt with, but they've been gone into. The US is just hitting a lot of issues that it's never really talked about. There's a lot of things in this that no one has really done yet. It's a very young country. I mean, there's very few countries in the world that have never, made a new constitution. The US has amended their constitution, but it has never been removed. Nothing's been taken out of the constitution. They've only added to it. So it's a country that is dealing with a lot of political turmoil. And it will be for, at least the next 2 or 3 years.
Right.
But there's
Yeah,
a
I feel
famous
the
quote.
same way, yeah.
Yeah, there's a famous quote that, whether you think it applies or not, that the US will do the right thing after having tried everything else. So I believe it's going to be okay in the end. It's just a period in the globally, it is a period of turmoil. In the US, it is an especially high period of turmoil as well. So,
All right.
you have people leaving because they don't want to deal with that, which I understand.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Mariana.
Hi, once again. And like you said, the USA elections, politics, all of that are way too important for the decisions being made by Americans. And speaking of that, let me ask you, how was these past election for you? How did you feel? What went through your mind when you saw the results? Were you expecting? Were you not? Were you disappointed? Were you not? I'm curious.
It was, I mean, it was a bit weird at the beginning. I was a bit surprised, but one thing the US, one thing you have to keep in mind about the US is very little power is fully concentrated in the executive branch of government. The Senate and Congress have a huge amount of that power. It's a country that, I mean, it was a weird election as well, if I'm honest with you. But keep in mind, it's only my second election that I voted in. That's another thing. I'm basing this on a sample size of 2, which isn't very scientific. But even more importantly, that it's a sample size of 2 in, situations that are a bit out of the norm. The era that we're in US politics is one that is dominated by President-elect Trump. It is an era that is still not entirely well understood by the people, by the government, by the people who've been looking at elections forever. It's a weird era. So at this point, I try not to, I try to just, okay, right now in the US, it's a big case of just, okay, well, that happened. All right, where do we go from here? Keeping in mind that this is a country that it swings a lot. This country really likes to go aggressive left and then aggressive right and then back again. It's the American pendulum. It loves doing that. It does it constantly. So, and it's done it again. It might have been unexpected, but it's not out of character for this country. Um, this is, yeah. So at this point, it's a case of no one, I have no idea what's really going to happen because no one does. We'll really get a feel for what the next few years are going to be like when, the president is actually sworn into office, the government actually comes back, um, and we'll see. Who knows? You know, I'm trying to worry less about things I cannot control. And that is something I cannot control. So hopefully that answers your question.
All right. I don't see any hands, so I'm gonna go ahead and ask a question myself. Julien, let's go back to school time because I was wondering, when it comes to international school in Brazil, you didn't go to international school, right?
I went to an American school in Brazil.
But no
So
one spoke English.
no, that okay, sorry. In Itajuba, I was at a Brazilian school, fully Brazilian. In Campinas, I was in an American school.
But then in Itajubá, in Minas, how long did it take? 1 year or two that
I was
you
there 2 years, I believe.
2 years? Yes, because I want to understand when it comes to schooling, like, okay, you went from the USA to Brazil, and then 2 years in Brazil and international school. And it is about the grades or about the money? How does it work? Like when you went to France, did you have to show your grades or just okay, your parents said, I'm gonna put him in international school, I'm gonna pay for it, everything's settled. How does it work actually?
Well, it was complicated. We couldn't really go to a French school because my sister and I had never been to a French school. We didn't have
Mhm.
French transcripts. And worse, our transcripts were a complete mess because,
I
you know,
I believe that's why I was just wondering, how did you guys do that? Like your parents had to, yeah,
no, well,
trying
we
to
went
tell
we
us.
went to an international school.
Mhm,
And yeah, I mean, it made sense. The reason also for the school in Brazil was one thing that I think we've learned is Brazil's education system varies aggressively based on where
mhm.
you are.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know whether or not I can't remember if there is an official curriculum. I think there is, but the level to which that curriculum is enforced and the level to which it actually exists
Mhm.
depends a lot on where you're located. And so my parents were getting worried that at the school that we were in Itajuba, which was, it wasn't a bad school, but the level compared to what we would have expected from a comparable American school was not what they were expecting. But that wasn't
Mhm.
the biggest problem, actually. You can catch up on school. The problem was language. The fact is, when you don't speak English for 2 years, you start
Mhm.
to lose it.
Yeah.
Um, and that was a big no-no for them. They absolutely did not want that to happen. So that was the big push as well, was to make sure that we maintained our English.
Yeah.
Um, and I understand them because my language has altered a lot. My first language used to be French. I had to take English second language courses back when I was a kid, which
Mhm.
is really funny to me because nowadays my first language is English now.
Yeah.
So it's very weird. When people ask me what my first language is, I ask them to split between what my mother tongue is, which is French, and my first language is English.
Yes.
Um, but they've changed over the years.
Hmm.
So, they didn't want it to change to Portuguese and then lose the English. So,
So
um,
maybe that's the reason why you have like this international accents, not actually Texas or DC or whatever. But then when you were in France, you went straight to international school
yes.
and it was easy to get the paperwork. Then
Uh, yeah,
because you were in Brazil also in an international school.
yeah, yeah.
And then it was easy for you to get accepted in a university back in America.
So, okay, yeah, university applications. Well, I haven't thought about that in a while. That was intense. The fact is, no one in the school I was in had gone to the university I was going to, that I wanted to go to. So that was a bit worrying. And I was one of the only students applying to university in the US. Everyone else was applying in Europe. So just to give an idea of how stressful this is, in the UK, for UK admissions, you get a response in, like sometimes December. You apply in, October, you will get a response in December sometimes. They're conditional, but you get a response. I had to wait until April. So it's so stressful when all of your friends know where they're going to college and you're sitting there like, I don't know if I've been accepted yet. And you're just waiting. Well, actually, but I didn't wait till April because I did something else. To get into my school, I took early decision, which is where I basically said, like I said, my family and I'm doing engineering. We use statistics and we realized that we could tell the school, if you accept me, I will go there. I will withdraw my applications from everywhere else. This is my first choice. If you take me, I go. And they did. And so I went. But it was very weird doing American admissions in France
Yeah.
because
So
no one
you
else was
got
doing that.
the answer, like you got accepted in April to start in
So I
September.
got the answer actually because I did the early version. I got an answer in January, I think.
To start in September.
To start in September of the following year, yes.
Yes, because I think for the Brazilians it's interesting because in Brazil, as you know, they start in August, right? And then Mariana, is that for you in Portugal the same? The school system starts in September as well as in Belgium, and I think.
Yes, it starts in September and usually ends, depending on which grade you're in, it ends either in the beginning or the end of June.
And Aura, in South Africa is the same? The school starts in?
No, so school starts in January and then ends in December, and then we start again in January. So
Yeah,
we
same
have
as in Brazil. Same as in Brazil.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's I think it's a Southern Hemisphere thing.
yeah. Cool. All right. Let's move on. Aura, you had a question, Aura.
Yes. So I wanted to ask, so obviously like the educational system is different to all the different countries. But I wanted to ask, like, what do you think of, okay, so obviously America is well known for its school discipline. There you go. So I wanted to know if you could tell, like, if you could clearly tell the difference between the school's disciplinary programs.
Do you mean discipline as in behavioral or in terms of academic rigor?
Both, puts it. Both.
Whew. School in France was complicated because the French are not the nicest people as teachers often. They have a reputation. I mean, there's a whole joke in France. I don't have one, but the red pen, where you will get anything that French class is the worst because you will write something and you'll think, oh, this doesn't look too bad. And it will come back and the entire thing will be red. And there will be circles and diagrams and it looks like the teacher hates you. So it was very weird in the US. Again, remember, I only did primary. So it's hard for me to compare because I didn't do middle school in multiple countries or high school in multiple countries. By accident, it ended up getting split. So what I will say is, in my experience, the Brazilian schools were a bit, I don't want to say the word lax because that's not true, but they were more, I want to say open, a little less strict in some cases. The language teachers were strict. I remember at the beginning, I was in Portuguese first language when I moved to Campinas, and Portuguese grammar is just as bad, if not worse, than French grammar. So that they were strict, but other classes they'd be a bit less. Math was a lot less strict in Brazil for me. In France, again, the language, it's because these are countries that are very proud of their language, right? So language courses tend to be much stricter. In the US, the English classes were not as strict, but I found them more interesting because we did a lot more reading, a lot more literature, and I was always in the literature courses anyways. However, the science in the US is much more important. So, the science was more rigorous. Keep in mind also that I took the IB. I did the International Baccalaureate, which is even another subset of think, like almost every country has a 2-year program at the end of high school from the last 2 grades. And the one I did was IB. Um, and IB was very scientifically rigorous. I had to run, document, and, prove an experiment while I was there. Which doesn't sound that bad until, you're in high school, you've never really run like a whole experiment only on your own. And it's held to the same rigor I've experienced as you would in college. So we were doing a college level experiment in high school, and that was very rigorous, but interesting. So does that answer your question?
Right. Mariana is back for a question.
Yes, I am. Actually, I have, where is it? Where's my notebook? I've been taking notes. But I have something to tell you. Oh, here it is. I have something to tell you about Portugal regarding universities because I don't know. I think it should be a little bit like this. Um, and also the comment you made about French teachers is the same in Portugal. I think it's a common thing at this point. But about university, here in Portugal, when we apply, we are forced to choose six. And then you make a list, and the first place you get, imagine you get in all of them. You're accepted to all of them. You can only answer your first option. You cannot choose.
No.
Doesn't matter if you had Harvard as your third and you got in. You're getting in the first one. It doesn't matter. So yeah. And also now my question is, or I kind of stole it, but okay. Where do you think you had contact with, in your opinion, the best sort of education system? In which country?
I mean,
Just
the thing is, it
on the
has to be the
spot.
US because that's where I did college. It's very hard for things to compete with going to college. Because, in college you get to choose what you take. And I went to a university that was extremely open. So I took engineering, yes, but I didn't have to only take engineering. I took Portuguese classes, I took sociology courses as well. As long as I had enough credits to graduate, I could do whatever I wanted. So it was just amazing because I could do things I never would have done otherwise. And obviously, the university I went to also had space programs. I launched a satellite when I was a sophomore, which is insane. And I was one of the leads on a satellite launching next year in theory, if they've kept up. So those opportunities are I mean, to launch something into space before you finish your education to me is insane. And it was one of the best parts of that. Before Heather, Carlos was asking about Airbus or Boeing.
Yeah.
Statistically, Airbus is safer because their planes don't crash when you get a software error. Well, okay, it happened one time. But I know way too much about plane crashes, way too much. And so I'm not going to say too much because it tends to scare people. Planes are very safe, like the safest mode of transport on the planet. But take Airbus. Boeing, they're in the middle of a huge trial as well because they lied about their compliance. So, anyways, Heather.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on. Okay, Heide, with a question, please.
Oh, you're muted.
Oh, the mic.
Julia, about the quality of life, from your point of view, what is the best state and what is the worst state to live in US?
Okay.
That's a huge one.
Statistically, the worst state to live in the US, the one that scores the worst in every single metric, is Oklahoma. That is the worst state you could possibly live in. The best state in terms of the metrics on education, quality of life, is Massachusetts. However, that comes with the massive condition of if you have enough money to live in Massachusetts. Because yes, it has the best quality of life, but it's also one of the most expensive states to live in. The university I went to was in Rhode Island, which is right next to Massachusetts. Boston is an amazing city. Loved Boston. It's a European city, but in the US. So you get the best of both worlds. But it's so expensive, insanely expensive. Um, but honestly, the Northeast is almost always a safe bet, because and the Northeast is nice because that's also where you have all the big cities, New York, DC, Boston, Pennsylvania, sorry, Philadelphia. So the Northeast is nice because you have all these cities and they're all very well interconnected. And then, of course, you've got the West Coast and the Northwest. States like Oregon are very good to live in, Washington State, California. California, same problem, insanely expensive. Um, Oregon as well. But these are, I think it's more accurate in the US to say it's a bit less which state you live in and a bit more whether you live in urban or suburban or rural areas. The US is 90% nothing. You can, crossing the country, there is nothing in this country because it is so big. So, if you're in the middle of nowhere, it's not unless you love the middle of nowhere, it's not great. But the cities are pretty good.
Can you please tell us a little bit more about Oklahoma then? What is the big issue or what is the problem there?
Well, it just ranks last on quality of life, education. It's also a very rural state. There's almost no one lives there. And in my opinion, the worst part of it is that it is basically a tornado magnet. I don't know if you've ever been in a tornado, but they're not fun. And Oklahoma, I think, gets the most out of any state. So, I mean,
Okay,
there's a
that
whole,
explains. Yeah.
yeah. Dallas got a few tornadoes as well. We used to have tornado drills, which were interesting. If you've ever seen, I don't know if anyone here has seen a tornado, but they're really wacky because the sky turns green. And that's not like it looks, no, it turns green. That's how you know there's a tornado, that the sky goes green. And then the sirens go. And so what you'd have to do is every house most houses didn't have a basement. So there'd be a closet that was built in the center of the house. And that was the tornado closet. And so you would keep a box of cereal and a flashlight in there. And when the tornado siren went off, you'd go into the closet, the very small closet. And when you're a family of four in the small closet, it's a bit annoying. And you would wait there for an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours, depending on how long it took for the tornado warning to go away. And that was.
Do they have a standard size for the closets?
I have no idea. All I know is that if the entire house fell apart, usually the closet was the last thing standing.
Yeah, that's not all. We see that also on TV, right? So that's why I was wondering if it's a standard size because I can imagine some families are bigger than others. But anyhow, so we don't
No
know.
idea. Well,
All right.
they taught us all the other stuff, like get into the bathtub and put a mattress over it. Was a common one. Well, bathtubs tend to be some of the strongest things in a house. And if you put the mattress over it, it'll absorb the impact of the roof falling on it.
Oh,
So that's
right.
like something else that we were taught
But you
to
still
avoid
can breathe
tornadoes.
then.
Yeah, and the schools are built so that the bathrooms are tornado shelters. Um,
Wow.
it's weird. I've never had to deal with tornadoes since then, but that was a weird thing to just be used to. Oh, there could be a tornado today. It's the summer. The sky looks green. Let's wait for the siren to go off.
And it's always a sign when the sky looks green then.
Yep, sky would turn green, and you'd know there was a tornado coming up, or it was somewhere already.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay. Crazy, crazy stuff. And you're talking about Dallas, right? In
Dallas, yes.
Oklahoma, it's a little bit different then, or
I've never lived in Oklahoma, so I have no idea.
no, what I mean, because you said that they are magnets to tornadoes there, so they should have the same regulations, or it's
Yeah,
different.
I hope so. I hope so. I hope for the people there that they do.
All right. Okay. I don't see any more hands. Angelino, are you awake? Because you didn't ask any questions. I think you think like you thought Julian was not.
Yes, I am. I'm very awake.
All right, so let's go for the last question. Angelino has a last question for Julian. Let's hear him
Well,
out.
you speak three languages, I guess. Do you have intention to learn a fourth language?
I tried to learn German, and
Oh,
I got a little bit of the way there. I can understand, so thanks to the Portuguese and the French, I can understand Spanish, and I can speak some of it because I took Spanish as well. Um, Also, if you speak Portuguese and French, you can also understand Italian, I discovered, which is very, very weird. Um, Italian sounds like
Discovered?
if you, to me, it sounds like if you mixed Portuguese and French together and then sort of like shook it a bit, and that's Italian.
Oh, it's so
Um,
funny.
they're all
Um,
Romance languages, so they all share similar roots, right? But it's very
Julian, I
weird to
think
hear.
like your answer, I think your answer, it's just music for Angelino's ears because he's a German guy living in Ibiza, so he speaks the two
Ah,
languages that you'd love to learn. So I think you should get in touch. And I think Angelina loved your answer. Was that the
um,
only
well,
question?
they're very connected for sure. All the languages are very connected, huh?
I liked
So,
German.
the they're all very connected. And if you speak one language and another language, that's always easier to learn another language
Hmm.
mm,
because it's always, built on another language.
yeah, I liked German. I just found the issue I had with German is that it has the same issue as French and Portuguese, maybe worse, is that the grammar is insane.
Yes.
German grammar has it. There's like the rankings of worst grammar, and Germany has its own little special box for grammar that, I mean, it's awesome because it's very interesting, but oh my goodness, it is. I mean, someone needs to make a flow chart because there's what 16 cases in German. Um, I think I can't remember how many, but there's a lot. And it's a cool language. One day I might pick it back up if I have the time. Um,
Wow, you're definitely gonna have to have the time because I've been learning Dutch for 18 years and I'm still struggling with. I don't think I would ever be able to learn German, so I would need another 20 years to learn the language. Anyhow, guys, we just ran out of time. It was so much fun, Julia. Thank you so much for being here with us. I think that you would manage to have another hour, no problem whatsoever, because you have so many interesting things to tell us with your young age. I'm still amazed by your knowledge at such a young age. I believe also like getting to know Aura, Mariana here, and Nikki, that you guys from the new generation, you know so much more than we used to know. Back in the days, we didn't have all this knowledge and all this information in the reach of the hands. And it's so amazing to hear to your stories and how you tell things. So, once again, thank you so much. And for all of you who are here, it was a pleasure to have you here. This week we have on Thursday another meeting again with the USA speaker, but she was born in Colombia. So, I'm going to be sharing her video with you and I hope to see you soon. Okay? Thank you so much.
thank you.
Oh, have a lovely evening. Thank you, Julie.